different quilt shows and other fiber shows.
Oh.
And she's from Oregon.
Ah.
And the front is wonderful, but the back
Oh.
Even more.
Wow.
Wonderful. That's beautiful.
And I have about 5 different ones, different
Oh,
colors.
so pretty.
3 of her best.
Yeah, very nice.
Yeah.
Is it stitchery? Or?
Oh, thank you. The necklace I made, along with the earrings. It is applique.
Oh.
So she buys the shirts, she dyes the shirts or has them dyed,
Oh.
and then she does the applique on the shirts.
They're beautiful.
Yeah, very
Yeah,
nice.
they're all incredible. She does sweatshirts and all kinds of good things. And ask me later, and you can write down her name. She's got an online presence and lots there. Okay, so I have to be able to see this, and I need to. There, when it does here. I just need to turn up the.
Volume?
No sound. The contrast, so it's brighter at my end. And while we're at it, this is Maggie May. Maggie May left us in 2012. That's her toy Zoe, which I still have, and
Cute.
she stays with me whenever I'm on my computer. Okay, let me start. All right, so what I'm going to do, oh no, that's not what I want. I took 2 presentations that I've done and kind of put them together, kind of, and I haven't used PowerPoint much in the last few years, so just give me a second. I do want to play from the start, but don't want everything on the bottom there. I want this big. So I will get rid of this. Swap displays. Oh yeah, I guess I do. Okay. So
That big, so we can rent it.
wait a minute. I'm seeing it big, but
No, he has big.
yeah. Okay, that's not what I want. I want what's on my screen to be on that screen, so. All right. We'll get there. You know what I'm going to do? I'm just going to make what I've got here big and forget about doing it the right way. There.
That's perfect.
That works. Okay, so I started weaving in the early 1970s. And when I was in my early mid-20s, let's say. And first I want to find out, though, about you. How many of you have ever woven? Just want to know my audience. Okay, so we've got, 1, 2, 3, 4, okay, about half of you.
Kindergarten.
Yeah. How old are in kindergarten? Does that bring more of you with the hands up? Is that what, that is weaving?
Yeah.
And that was a lot of people's first introduction to weaving, was that kindergarten pot holder, the red little loom that you put the stretchy things on. And how many of you can tell the difference between something that's woven and something that's knitted? By looking at it. So take a look at what you're wearing, okay? If the threads seem to overlap at right angles, then it's probably woven. If you can see tiny little loops in there, then it's probably knit or crocheted or something like that.
Oh, I see pearls.
Pardon?
I see pearls.
Pearls on the surface. Okay, how's the surface design? Okay. So about half of you have some concept of weaving, okay. So a little bit of history of weaving. I'm not going to spend too much on this, but I want to make sure that you're with me on the rest of it. Weaving is one of the oldest crafts, but not much has been documented about it having been done more than 9,000 years ago, because fabric doesn't last. It
Yeah.
degrades and it falls apart. It's not like pottery or even like woodworking or rock work or whatever that would last. So there's very little that's been found that's pretty old. There is a piece of linen cloth from about 7,000 BCE in Egypt. That's the 9,000-year-old one. There's a depiction of a loom, also from Egypt, at about 5,000 BCE. But otherwise, we really don't know much about the old history of weaving. Although there probably is one if there's linen cloth in 9,000 years ago. Until the Industrial Revolution, weaving, spinning, dyeing was a time-consuming household task. Usually, in most cultures, it was the work of women. In a few cultures, it was the work of men. I don't know if you're familiar with the Zapotec people of Oaxaca. The men are the weavers in that culture. Yeah, and I have a good friend who's, the family's in Lathrop, who are weavers, who are from Oaxaca. The father is a sixth generation master weaver, and the son is seventh generation master weaver. It's fascinating. Mostly women do the spinning in that culture, and the dyes are men and women, depending on the dyes. But there are a handful of other cultures where men are the weavers. Okay. And a little more information. Weaving, like any art form or craft, has its own vocabulary. You probably know the word loom, and a lot of you know what a loom looks like. I do have some pictures. It's a structure to hold threads in place, allowing the weaver to manipulate them and put them under tension. You probably know the word warp. You either know warp and weft or warp and woof. Woof and weft are the same. Most of the people I know use weft, so I use weft. Warp are the long threads. So in one of my scarves, the threads that run the long way are the warp threads. The weft threads are the threads that I lay in one at a time and beat hard, and those are the weft. Okay, and weaving has three basic elements: color, texture, and pattern. Most woven pieces, you'll see that either color or texture or pattern is emphasized, or maybe two of them. I tend to be a color and texture weaver, so all of the pattern that I have, whether it's stripes or whatever, is done with color. It's not done by structurally changing the number of threads that go up and down. That is pattern, and that's done with a loom or with your fingers, however you do it. And trying to emphasize all three gives you a very busy piece. If you try to emphasize the texture of the yarn and the color of the yarn and the pattern that you're weaving. I have one photo in here of something that has all three, but it's really hard to do all three, and most people will just focus on one or two. I'm a color and texture weaver. Okay, my beginnings as a weaver. You went through my education background already, so when I got my BA, I was a psychology major, social psychology and behavioral psychology, but I also had a minor in art history. We didn't have formal minors, but I had enough units in art history if I had been somewhere else to have a formal minor. Then I got my teaching credential for K through 8 school. I was an elementary school teacher all my adult life. And one class that I took influenced my beginning as a weaver and a person who was just interested in craft and art. And it was called Arts and Crafts for Kids. And we dabbled in everything. It was a lot of fun. But it really got me interested. I also had a good friend who was a weaver, and she got me interested just watching her. So the first kind of weaving that I did was called tablet weaving or card weaving, which is actually one of the hardest kinds of weaving to do, but I didn't know that at the time. And that's where I started. You have a stack of cards. Here's a stack of cards with holes in them, A, B, C, and D. And you run a thread through each one and you turn those cards to create pattern. It's what's called a warp-faced weave. What you see in the final product, and I'm going to pass some of these around. I also have some photos of bookmarks that I used to make and sell. These are bands, or could be made into belts or guitar straps or whatever. But all that you're seeing in this is the weft thread. Am I right? No, you're seeing the warp thread, sorry. This is warp-faced weave. At the very edge, you see one thread that's going in and out underneath, but inside, but you don't see that on the actual design. So I'm going to pass everything in one direction. I find that works best. I'll collect them at this end. So I bought an Inca loom to use as a structure for the card weaving. And you can see the cards are sitting there, and the weaving is in process here, and then it accumulates at the other end here on this area that is wound up. Okay, so these are the warp threads, the long threads, and those are what you're seeing in the pattern. The weft thread, which was also purple in this one, goes back and forth, but only gets seen at the edge. And I made a lot of bookmarks. It was the 70s, so I made a lot of bookmarks with women's symbols on them.
Oh, yeah.
So what determines the pattern is those holes in the...
Right, the threads, you turn it, the threads wrap around each other, and it's a very complex kind of
Yeah.
weaving.
I'm having a hard
And I
time
developed some of my
visualizing.
own patterns. It amazes me that I did that at the beginning, because that, in retrospect, it's wow, okay. I mean, I had a pattern book, and I would do some of the things in the book, but then I would make changes to them and make them look, different. So, okay. Then I had an opportunity to buy a used loom, big loom. It was handmade, and it was made out of softwood. It was made out of pine, so there were nicks and all kinds of things. It was old. And it was I wish I had a photo of it. It was a counterbalance loom, if anybody knows the different types of looms, but it had rollers on the top that would pull the harnesses, the places that held the little places you put the threads through, the heddles. There's the vocabulary of weaving. And it was big. It would do a 40-inch piece, and it took up half a room, basically. But it was, it was wonderful for me. It came warped already with an alpaca warp that the previous owner had left on it, which I thought, great. I started weaving it and discovered I'm allergic to alpaca.
Oh, no.
I'm maybe slightly allergic to wool. I use wool. It'll make me itch a little if I wear it, but alpaca, I was sneezing.
Oh, no.
I can't even go to the alpaca section of a yarn store without starting to sneeze. So I started doing a different kind of weaving on that led me to weave rugs. And this is a warp-faced weave. Everything that you see on this wall hanging is the warp threads. The weft is this, stringy cotton that's coming out the bottom, but you don't see it anywhere in the piece. Okay. And then, next, okay, let's see, I didn't finish this. I began the tablet weaving, bought the used floor loom, began weaving rugs. I started taking weaving classes. I went around the country to different weaving schools, and I'd take a class here and a class there over vacation, because I was an elementary school teacher. So I didn't have a whole lot of time, but I used it for weaving. I got my master's at Stanford with a focus on art education. And then I discovered that De Anza College had a weaving program. So I started taking classes there. Maggie Brosnan was the teacher, and her assistant was Mark Daly. She's still around. Maggie passed away from lupus quite a few years ago. But I took classes in weaving, natural dyes, and spinning. And that, kind of got me going. For the first 6 years I was weaving, I wove only in neutral colors. Colors like this piece I just showed you. But during one of the classes at De Anza, we worked with some natural dyes, and I got hooked. So I started collecting plant material and started boiling pots of plants and using very noxious chemicals with them, which was, people were still doing that in the 70s and 80s. Things like, what was the compound of chrome that we used, a bad one, and copper sulfate and tin sulfate, tin something. Those were bad. So over the years, natural dyers realized they needed to be only using alum, which was natural, and iron, and that was it. So, but back in those days, we got some gorgeous colors from those nasty metallic salts. And I bought a bulk spinner. I've got a picture of that in a bit, and I started spinning this really thick yarn and dyeing it in natural dyes. And I had a great time with the natural dyes. And so I wanted to make something out of it, and I started making rugs. But the rugs, because it was a single ply yarn, it was too delicate to actually walk on. So they were wall pieces. And I've got some details. That's a detail of the yarn, but this is one picture of a rug. It's about 3 by 5. And that's a detail of it, using that yarn and Irish linen. Shows started up again at the end of 2021, and contact with my customers and the public in general has again restarted my creativity. But I am definitely slower than I used to be. I mean, there were times early on, before any shoulder surgeries or anything, that, and before exercising, it took a lot of my time, and that I could just do the weaving part of maybe 8 scarves in a day, a long day, but I could do that. I was fast enough at the weaving to be able to do that. And now, in a day, I don't push it past a half scarf. So I'm much slower than I used to be. That's all of this presentation. I wanted to give you some time to look at my work up close, but I also have another thing I can run through kind of quickly that shows the process on my loom. So I'm going to skip a lot of it and I did a presentation to a weaving guild in Berkeley about weaving with chenille and the pitfalls and whatnot. But I just want to show you the process. So it saves a lot of time in weaving. Every thread has to go through the reed on the beater, the thing in front that you beat the fabric with. It's spaced out the right number of ends per inch for your piece, whatever it is. And to then put threads in order through those heddles, those little holes in the middle things.
Wow.
That are on the 4 or 8 harnesses in the same order, otherwise the threads will cross. Weaving is not a forgiving medium. It is a very exacting medium. I can get, if I start from scratch and warp some scarves, to do every mistake I make, I have to stop and, go back once I've discovered it, unweave whatever it is, untie not all the knots, but some of the knots to, cross threads back the way they're supposed to be. It's not forgiving. It's a very exacting medium. When I started working in polymer clay, it was like, woo, I'm free. Because every mistake in polymer clay becomes something else fun. So that was very freeing for me. So what I do now is I have 3 looms for the projects that I do. And I tie on to the existing ends of the previous project and just pull the threads through, rather than having to hand put every single thread through this beater and then through these heddles in order. Okay? So everything I make tends to be this width. I had a customer who really, really, really wanted 3 scarves this width. So I did a whole bunch more than that because I had it warped, the loom warped for this width, and I wasn't going to waste it. I
wanted to ask you on this purple one, how did you get those little fringes?
Okay, those little things are attached to the yarn. They come with the yarn.
Oh, they do.
But when I weave them, they're all tucked into the weaving.
Oh,
And I sit at shows, basically, you know, there's a lot of time in between customers or whatever, and just pick out all the ends
oh,
by hand. So there's a lot of time in that. So this is the warp threads that I've measured out on a big warping wheel. I should have taken a picture of that, I didn't. And they're in order, actually. See this thread running through them and through again? The threads are like this, and that thread running through is running through this cross, so that this one is the first one, this one's the second one, this one's the third one. I measure them on the warping wheel, I make that cross every time I go through, and the threads stay in order. It's something that all weavers don't necessarily put it here like I do, but that's something that every weaver does. This is the warp for maybe 3 scarves, 4 scarves. This one's 5, okay. And it's chained. So I'm tying it onto the previous ends. And in the back of the loom, there's a place to wind it all on and put layers of cardboard in between it. And then I get there's a war in the weaving world that's been going on for eons. Do you warp your loom front to back or back to front? I'm a front to back weaver, so that's what I do. So I end up combing the warp with my fingers because it all sticks together anyway, and chenille is really slick, so it's silk, but it still sticks together. And then I adjust the tension, put it in bundles, tie it on to the front. This metal rod, I've replaced these metal rods so many times. I mean, those rods are strong, but I use so much tension. I started as a rug weaver, so you need a lot of tension, and the chenille needs a lot of tension. So my rods end up warping. I have to replace them.
Is there a part of this whole process that you really like the best?
Oh, sitting down and weaving, yeah. That's the best. I mean, if nothing goes wrong, you're either meditating or swearing at the loom. One or the other. You go a long time with the meditating part, and then a thread snaps or something. It's like, ow. But yeah, it's like Gandhi and his spinning. It's that same meditative process.
Yeah.
And because I do color and texture and not pattern, I'm an every other thread up and down person. So once I've got that loom warped, I can put something on TV and weave.
It's automatic.
all the time goes into the ahead of time, into, choosing the colors, figuring out what I'm doing, measuring the warp, getting it, that cross in place correctly, getting that to the loom, getting it tied onto the loom, getting it wound onto the loom. All that is the time.
So
Part of the skill is how tight you.
Yeah, the skill comes in, it took me about 8 years to get my selvages really even when I first started weaving. And every different fiber, it takes time to get the selvages even. And that's where the skill comes in, that's where the practice, it's just hours and hours of practice come in. And I can find all the problems with my selvages, but to the person who's not a weaver, they look pretty good. So
Also you said you were a texture person, and is that possible, like you put something in between when you are weaving? Like feather, put in a feather or something?
yeah, I could. I think I'm too rigid to be able to do that. I'm not somebody who easily, I would have a hard time doing a collage. It's just not my thing. I like order. But yes, you could easily. And I've done weavings with kids where you, outside, you take a big limb of a tree and you tie it onto the tree, and then you run a rope or whatever up and down to another limb, and you put in branches and you put in leaves and you put in fiber and you put in, you make a tree weaving, and then you cut it down and you hang it on somebody's wall. So it gets tied on here, I put in a piece of cardboard, and then I start actually weaving right here. And as I weave more, everything can loosen up and you can roll that extra warp thread that's in the back forward. I do a few inches at a time. And it starts to collect down below as an actual piece of fabric. And when I get to the end of one scarf, I put in some spacers for the fringe and start the next one. So they're one at a time, but on one warp I usually do, I could do up to 10 back in the day. Now I usually do 3. So that's it on my presentation, I think. Yeah. So, any other questions? Yes?
You had problems with your shoulders?
Yeah.
When you talk to other weavers, what are any other injuries that stop
Yeah,
people
it all
from
has to
doing
do,
it, or-
it all has to do with ergonomics and posture. And I learned that later in life. I've taken classes on, ergonomics for weavers and all that. And I've had, physical therapists watch me weave, either on video, or I had one actually come to my house and watch me weave. And a lot of it was a matter of not hunching over the loom, learning to put my shoulders back and down. How many hundreds of thousands of shoulder rolls have I done in my life? And getting up and moving around for at least 5 minutes every 25 minutes at the most. Back in the day when I would weave 8 scarves, I wasn't getting up much. And I had one of my Zapotec weaver friends, young guy, the 7th generation master weaver, was starting to have trouble with his hands and with his back, and I told him, you've got to get up every 25 minutes and walk around. You can't stay there, and you can't hunch over. You've got to keep your back straight, bend from your hips, yes.
Two questions, just one about that, do they make standing looms that you could?
There are standing looms, yes. In fact, the Zapotec looms are standing looms.
And the second question is, you kind of talked about your evolution of your art, and how you did some things because they were profitable and you needed to support what you really loved. So my question to you is, what is your true love here?
What is my true love here?
Yeah, if money wasn't a concern,
Weaving. I wouldn't be
Weaving.
doing
You
polymer
would be.
clay. I mean, it's fun, but I wouldn't be doing it.
Does it sell?
Oh yeah, it sells. And the earrings really sell. So do these. I mean, at the holidays especially. Yeah. Yeah, and my weaving sells at the holidays too, but not enough to pay for
do
itself.
you enjoy the other stuff?
I enjoy it, yeah. Yeah, I wouldn't do it if I didn't enjoy it. And I've started, doing things like making, I sell at quilt shows. And a customer gave me the idea of making necklaces out of bobbins. And there was somebody else
Oh.
making, yeah, it's bobbins, so are the earrings. And there was somebody else that was making them. And I looked at hers and I thought, okay, hers are low end, and that's fine. I'm gonna make something expensive. I'm gonna put expensive materials into it, so I'm not competing with her, and I'm doing my own thing. And they've sold very well in the handcrafts world.
But your leg is the meditation part,
The
is that?
weaving, yeah.
This is.
That and the color. I mean, choosing the color and, putting the colors together. I brought these, I didn't mix them around. These are from another class that I took on acid dyes, and it's just color samples.
My question is, polymer clay, and once I took a class, but it's a fume, it's toxic, right?
Yes.
So how do you do
I have
that?
a separate oven, completely
Okay.
separate. It's in my garage under an exhaust
Yeah,
fan.
okay.
And we do not go, I have a sign for the door to the garage, Fimo cooking. And we do not go in there. If I do go in, I hold my breath. I'm pretty good at holding my breath.
And the dogs come
The dogs do, but they run through, they have a dog door in and a dog door out, and they're after whatever's in the yard. And their lifespan is a lot shorter than ours. So I'm not worried about them. But yeah, it's toxic. That on the package, it doesn't tell you it's toxic, but it is toxic. It's uncured, polymer, it's uncured plastic. And what you're doing is you're baking off the plastic, the liquid polymer. And so,
Did you
I'm
say
very
those
careful, and I wear gloves.
Those little things were for needles?
You can use them for sewing needles, for, larger needles for the big one, but I sell a lot of them as pill bottles. Because they're glass, they can be washed. I carry 2 in my purse, in fact, I have one in my pocket now.
What do you sell those for, the craft shows?
Yeah.
I mean, what do you get, if I may ask?
What? Oh, the price? Oh, the small ones are 20 and the big ones are 30. I've been carrying this one in my purse for years and years and years. It's a little dirty, that's about it. But it's got my migraine pills. Those go everywhere with me.
I know, I get that, yeah.
Imatrix.
Can you wash them?
Yeah, actually, I didn't know much about washing polymer clay, and I made a pan that was about this big, and I had it on a light jacket, about the weight of this, and I sent it through the washer and dryer. I didn't realize it was on it. It came out so clean. It was wonderful.
Because it's plastic.
It's plastic. It's plastic, and the back is, it's metal. I mean, if I did that a lot, the back of the pin probably would rust over time. And the glue that I use is not water soluble. The glues that I use are really bad. I have a respirator, and I do those outside. And my polymer pieces that require gluing, earring backs for post earrings and button backs and barrette backs, those stay outside for 3 days before I bring them in. The package says 24 hours, and I leave them out for 3 days. So.
In Missouri, I lived there when I was young, and there was an old neighbor man. He was old and had a loom, big one, with the walnut logs he had made or something. I mean, it was humongous. So he asked all the neighbors if we would give us old clothes and wash them. And that old
Raw silk is more of a wild silk, and the silkworm chews its way out of the cocoon. and the remaining pieces are spun. And so it has a whole different texture. It's in a different place.
Have you gone and seen these farms?
No. No, I haven't. I know people who have. There are a lot of people in my guilds who have, but. Okay, so this is a Rowana that I dyed a lot of the yarn in. This is a whole collection of my silk scarves. And this is a piece that is the closest I've come to emphasizing texture, but texture is really the silk, and color and pattern. And this one a little bit. So those two are the Bombex silk, the shiny stuff, and then this is the wild silk or raw silk. And this was that next loom that I bought. It didn't have this top piece on it. I got this from a student at San Jose State in the 80s who had been in the weaving program there. San Jose State had a weaving program. It doesn't anymore. None of these schools do anymore. But this is another LeClaire loom, the same company as my other one. It's a lighter weight loom. It is Canadian maple. And I had this part built by a company in Stockton, the Gilmore Loom Company. I was at a hand weaving show, and my booth was set up across from the Gilmore people. And they had this on top of one of their looms, and I thought, that would be great on top of my loom. I can put my bobbins up here, and it's got a light underneath that I could actually see what I'm doing. So I talked with them and I said, if I give you the dimensions of my loom, actually if I get somebody strong to load my loom into my minivan and bring it to you, can you put one of those tops on for me? And they did. It's been wonderful.
If I may ask, how do you get the colors on the tassels?
Okay, the tassels are the warp threads, and I paint that warp on tables long before it goes on the loom, and that's where I cut off the warp, and it's continuous through the whole scarf. It's not a separate thing like you would do in knitting. On knitting, if you want to add tassels on, you add them afterwards. In weaving, it's just a continuous thread. So, okay, so that was my next loom. And then in 1989, same Michelle Whifflinger who taught all those wonderful classes, I realized today in going through my things to figure out what to bring here, I have a sets of color samples from 4 different natural dye classes I took from her. It was amazing. But she sent out something to everybody on her list that included a button about this big that was made out of polymer clay. And I thought, oh, that button sent me in a new direction. I knew about polymer clay. I had bought Fimo as gifts for children over the years. So I bought a book about polymer clay as an art form. There was one book out at the time. It was really good. And I read it cover to cover several times. I took a class in polymer clay, and I started making and selling polymer clothing buttons at the Artifactory. And that's a collection of my buttons. And they sold. They sold well. And one customer suggested to me, you should make these into earrings. So I took a jewelry making class and began making earrings and pins out of polymer clay. And bingo, I had finally found a way to support my expensive weaving addiction, because selling weaving wasn't doing it. And as those of you who have tried to ever sell your paintings or whatever, it's hard. You may invest a few $100s in printing greeting cards, of your paintings, and those will sell, but you may not make back the amount that you paid to have them printed to start with the number that sells, and it goes on and on. So I suddenly realized that women will buy attractive, inexpensive earrings, and deep down, I already knew this. I was raised in the costume jewelry capital of the US, Rhode Island. My mother did jewelry piecework at home when I was young. My high school best friend's father was a jewelry designer. I knew this. I knew that women bought jewelry. I had other relatives, aunts and uncles, who worked in the metal jewelry industry, or they worked for Gorham that made silver tableware. So I knew that, and there I was, back to my roots. So this is a pair of my polymer earrings and a polymer pin. And the polymer clay that I do is built, it's called caning. So the designs are built all the way through, like a sushi roll. Okay, and then sliced with very sharp blades. These are some of my pins that I make. And this is, I brought my needle cases just to give you an idea.
It's a needle case.
They are needle cases and they're pill bottles. They're glass vials that I've covered with polymer clay, just to give you an idea of my polymer that you can touch. And I made necklaces and bracelets, and I still do. And holiday trees, lots of holiday trees. And Stars of David, and hearts, which I showed you. And barrettes, and earrings. So in the 80s and 90s, we created that teaching space at the Artifactory upstairs. And I began teaching children's weaving classes, as well as polymer clay classes to both children and adults. And most of my classes were held upstairs at the Artifactory. I also taught some adult classes at various fiber conferences, weaving conferences, knitting conferences around California and in a few other states. I even taught one in Canada. The National Hand Weavers Conference was held in British Columbia one year, and I taught a class there. So this is kind of dark, but it's kind of a close-up of me working on polymer. Just go through a few of these. I know folks wanted to focus it on weaving, so this is a shot at one of my classes at the Artifactory. This is one at a class I did at the National Hand Weavers Conference when it was in Cincinnati, I think. And taking the polymer on an airplane was interesting because I was taking raw plastic, basically, and it's, I don't know how related it is to the plastic explosives that are made, but you know, after 9/11, it got to be a little dicey trying to take things through the airport. So here's another picture at one of the classes and the color gradations that I did do in polymer. And then in the late 90s, I began working in rayon chenille, which is what these are. Weaving scarves from it, and I've continued weaving them until the present. The color palette that's available is just wonderful. And according to the fashion industry, this fiber has been out of style for decades, but nobody told my customers, so they still sell for me. And this is another Ruana that I did with rayon chenille scarf and several rayon chenille scarves. But they're better in person, and they're especially better if you get to feel them. So I'm going to pass around a few of these yummy ones. I'm going to hang on to those for a minute. This is from, for a while somebody was making some metallic chenille. There's a metallic thread in it, and they discontinued it. And to get it anymore, I had to order. What should I have to order? It was something like maybe 15 pounds of it. And I probably still have at least half of that left. But it was worth getting because it adds that extra little bit of bling to, you know, that's black, but it's got just that extra little bit of metallic in it.
So this metallic isn't something you weave into it, it's already.
No, it's in the yarn. Yeah, if you look at the fringe, it's part of the yarn. That's a metallic thread. Okay, and then a little more of the different colors that I've been playing with over the years in chenille. And a few more polymer things from classes. Then in July of 1998, the Artifactory and Handcrafts Gallery in downtown Palo Alto closed. It was a building that was 5 businesses long, 2 stories high, at the corner of Emerson and Hamilton, on Hamilton. And it ended an era for many artists and our customers. We continued working a 3-day show once a year in early December until the present. And this year, I've got postcards for it. We're holding our last one this year. This is our 25th. We took 2 years off for the pandemic. Please take these, give them to your friends. Come join us. Julia will be there. Come see Julia's stained glass if you haven't. You probably have already done a presentation here. So I moved my studio home and continued to sell at fine crafts fairs and fiber shows. And for a while I was doing as many as 15 to 20 shows a year, which is a lot. I have a long setup. I'm not somebody who can come in and just throw things on the table. It takes me between 5 and 8 hours to set up for a show. I'm still doing probably 7 shows a year. I don't know how much longer I'll keep that up. But, you know, there was a time when I had my shop at the Artifactory. I was doing 4 or 5 shows a year, and I was teaching elementary school full-time. So once I retired from teaching elementary school, I started sleeping. I was telling Norm in the car that, you know, I started exercising more and sleeping, and there aren't enough hours in the day to get into my studio sometimes. So, but when we closed, this was our last picture together as a group. Then roll forward to 2008-09 was a real year of change for me. I don't know how many of you were familiar with the Stitches West Knitters Show that used to be in Santa Clara at the Convention Center every February, last weekend of February. Nobody here knits. Does anybody here knit? Yeah, okay.
I crochet.
It was a great place to buy yarn. They went out of business right after the pandemic. But I got really jazzed by some novelty knitting yarns that I saw, and I bought about $400 worth of novelty knitting yarns, and I was going to take these knitting yarns and I was going to weave with them. I was very excited about that. And then in the next 4 weeks after that, I bought another $600 worth of yarn and ribbons to add to the previously purchased $400 worth of knitting yarn. This is all leading up to something. On April 14th, before I had signed my taxes, I'm right-handed, I fell and dislocated my right elbow, shattered the radial head, and chipped my right ulna.
Oh.
That break is called the terrible triad, or the terrible trio, as Julia's nodding her head. It was a very serious injury, and it was my dominant hand. And I was told by the first doctor I saw that I would need surgery and I would not get back my full range of motion. She said I would get to here and here if I was lucky and worked hard. And that was it. And I thought, okay, how am I going to be weaving with my arm like that? So I was really worried I wouldn't be able to weave. I fired that doctor. And I interviewed 2 more. One was going to be out of town, but the one he recommended turned out to be the surgeon that I went to. I worked really hard at physical therapy, and in the 9 months that it took me to regain my full range of motion, my motivation was those 2 bags of yarn totaling $1,000 that I was going to weave into scarves. It was an amazing motivator for me, believe me. I really wanted to weave those scarves. So these are a couple of not great pictures of some of the things that came out of that. But this basket has a lot of the ones that I've woven since with knitting yarns.
She did a combination?
Mm-hmm.
It's a combination?
A combination of knitting yarns, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, knitting yarns. We can pass those around. And I've dyed, so I've got to get one with ribbons that I've dyed. Okay, this one has ribbons that I've dyed. So nylon will also dye with acid dyes, go figure. It dyes a lot lighter than the other fiber stuff. So, from 2009 to the present, I continued exploring color through acid dyes and natural dyes. Rayon chenille scarves continued to sell best for me, so my color exploration continued there too. I continued to play with those novelty knitting yarns. Then came COVID. While many artists' work flourished during the pandemic, mine stagnated. I was able to continue weaving and working in polymer through June of 2020. Then I spent weeks at a time without entering my studio. I just wasn't motivated. And another detail.
Can we ask questions?
Sure, I mean, if it's easy to hold the question to the end, but, you know, that's fine, but if you want to ask questions,
How
do.
long does it take to make a rug?
Ooh, don't even ask. Have you ever asked a quilter how long it took to make a quilt? It's the same kind of thing.
Way too long.
It's or how long it took you to paint a painting. I mean, it's the question that people ask because it's something concrete they can grab onto. And it's the hardest thing to answer because it varies so much. I mean, in these I was spinning the fiber, I was buying the sheep's wool and washing it and you know, carding it by hand and spinning it and then dyeing it and then weaving the rug. It took forever. I don't know how many hours altogether. And people ask me that about my scarves also, and it's hard to say. I can say hours, but depending on whether one of the warp threads broke while I was weaving it, well, that's 20 minutes to patch it. And, you know, and how many scarves I measured the warp for at the time, because I do them in succession. If I measured the warp for 10 scarves versus measuring it for 3 or for 1, most of the time it goes into warping them and not weaving it. So that amount of time, you know, which might be weekend, goes, you know, gets divided by 10 or 3 or just by 1. So it's really hard to say. In 1979, I joined the Artifactory. I wasn't sure when I came here what the age range was going to be, but you're all not too far from my age range. So how many of you were customers at the Artifactory Gallery in downtown Palo Alto on Hamilton?
Yep, for years.
Yeah, okay. And it was we had a first floor and a second floor. It was a large building, almost like a warehouse, but it wasn't. And it had no heat, no air conditioning. And we had an artist cooperative there where people had both studio space and retail space. And it was a wonderful, wonderful place. Many artists, you know, joined it over the years. We'd have maybe probably around 15, 16 at a time. And we, you know, operated by consensus, so our meetings took forever. But, you know, we were all in agreement by the time we left. And it was wonderful to have a studio space outside of my home where I could also meet the public and sell things. We also, at one point, had a teaching space upstairs, and I'll go into that farther on. Anyway, weaving is not an inexpensive craft. Looms, you can get secondhand. You can sometimes get them for free because someone has passed away and their heirs don't want to deal with this loom and this warping board and this warping mill and the room full of yarn and everything else. Just get it out of here. But if you buy a new loom, back in the 70s, a good big loom was running, you know, between $1,000 and $2,000, and now the equivalent is probably $8,000-9,000 or so, because they're made of hardwood. They're, you know, I have 2 looms. They're Canadian maple, and they're gorgeous pieces of furniture. My bulk spinning wheel is made from walnut, so you know the wood is expensive, let alone the craftsmanship that went into it. So I don't come from money, and as an elementary school teacher, my income was not high. So after a while, I realized if I was going to keep doing this, I needed to sell my work because it was just too expensive not to, and to be able to keep weaving. So in 1979, after I joined the Artifactory, I bought my first new loom. It was a 4-shaft. Let's see. This is a picture of it. I still have it. I converted it. 4-shaft means 4 of these contraptions in here that raise up and down when you press the foot pedals. And those contraptions have these metal things in them called heddles. Each one has an eye, a hole where you put 1 warp thread through in order. And depending on which one you put it on, you can make them all go up and down, or you can make 2 go down and 2 go up and 1 go down and 3 more after that go up, or whatever. So I started with 4 harnesses, 4 shafts. Those words are interchangeable, harness and shaft. At a later time, these looms are made in Montreal, Canada, French speaking. I had studied a lot of French. I could not speak it, but I had studied it. At one point, they came out with a kit to add 4 more harnesses. It was called an add a harness kit. And so I ordered it. And it came with 39 pages of instructions in French and English. So I can understand a little of French. And I put it together myself. And it was a long time after that when I realized that I really wasn't a pattern weaver. You want more shafts, more harnesses to be able to create a more intricate pattern. But I'm not interested in pattern weaving very much, so it's extra for me. So back to this one. So it was the 70s, and in addition to my expensive wall rugs, I had to have something to sell because people weren't buying the rugs at several $100s. So I made herb-stuffed double weave pillows. It was the 70s, it was the age of Aquarius, and each one of my herb blends was from herbal folklore, and it had a purpose. And I spun and dyed the yarn in natural dyes. This one is for...
Do they smell?
Yes, they have scents. This one is stuffed with hyssop, mint, sage, myrrh, and nutmeg. It's for aiding in honor, glory, and courage, and helping draw material gain and power over one's life, according to herbal folklore. Okay. And they sold better in the 70s and 80s than they do now, but I still make a few of them. However, at one point, okay, here's another picture at the Artifactory. Here's the stairway going upstairs. That was my space. Those were some of my rugs. That's my big loom from the back. That was after I had added the additional harnesses. And this was the pillows in their early version where I was doing a more complex fringe, and that changed. after a while, I realized, oh, I could make these with catnip inside, but who's gonna pay, at the time, when I started in the 80s, they were, or late 70s, no, early 80s, I was charging $15 each, now they're $25 each, but they're still, you know, affordable. And I thought, who's gonna pay $25 for a catnip pillow? Well, they turned out to be really good sellers even now. They're for the thoroughly pampered feline who has everything.
Yeah.
And there are a lot of those out there. When I said they were double weave, quilters always love this. There are no seams in the pillow. Okay? So the top half is every other thread. The bottom half is every other thread. I raise up and lower every other thread of the top, put a thread through, and then do the same thing on the bottom, put a thread through, and it attaches on the side. And keep doing that, and I'm weaving a tube. So I start off as one piece of fabric with the linen here, and then a little bit of the wool. Then I change to 2 pieces of fabric. I have created a pouch out of muslin with catnip inside, and I stuff that in when I'm done with the tube. Excuse me. I knew this was going to happen.
You're allergic to catnip.
No, it's not even Jesus. My voice does this when I talk a lot. Thanks. Okay. So those are for the thoroughly pampered feline who has everything. And these were the first ones I did just in dull colors, didn't dye these. Those were all natural colors of wool. Then I started dyeing wool, but it wasn't wool that I spun. So I have a lot of colors for them. And this is a picture of one customer's cat. I'm very happy with it. And this is another customer's cat. And this is Astra, my neighbor's cat, who, let's see if I can get this, she took a video for me.
I love it.
They love
How long
catnip.
do they last?
The scent will last at least a year, but what you can do, since you can't open it, is you can separate the weave a little and put a few drops of water on the pouch inside, stick it in the microwave for a few seconds, and that'll replenish the catnip, you know, shake it a little bit. They will turn them into drilled on felted messes that will pick up all the dust bunnies in the house as they drag them around.
Yeah, so doesn't work with the dogs?
Dogs, some dogs can destroy them. The cats, I've never had a customer tell me their cat was able to destroy the pillow, but one customer's Rottweiler did. So, yeah, it's catnip. It's a kitty thing. It's kind of like kitty marijuana. Yeah, it gets them high.
At least mine.
Yeah. So, okay, so my first few years at the Artifactory, I made very little money, not even enough to cover my monthly space fee. So I realized I needed to branch out if I was going to keep doing this. I began weaving shawls and ruanas. Ruanas are like I don't know, how many of you know what a ruana is? So I don't know. You know what a poncho is? Okay, so you stick your head through on a poncho. A ruana has a slit down the front, so you've got one big piece in the back and 2 half-size pieces in the front. You can throw one over your shoulder, you can throw the other over your shoulder. I have some pictures of them later. I took more classes. I began selling at a few crafts fairs. I bought a 2nd floor room, or a 3rd at that point. And then I took a dye class with Michelle Whiplinger, who's from Seattle. She's retired now. She was a chemist who got into fabric dyes. and she was really good. Thanks to her, I branched out into using acid dyes on silk and wool, and I started weaving silk scarves. Now, acid dyes chemically are pretty similar to natural dyes. And one nice thing about them is that you can get nearly, if not totally, 100% take up of the dye into the fiber. And you're not dumping it into the environment when you're done with the water. Cottons, plant materials, cottons, linens, hemp, rayon that's naturally processed, are dyed with fiber-reactive dyes. Fiber-reactive dyes do not have a very good take-up, and they're not great for the environment at all. So I, made a decision once I discovered how to work with, took a class in how to work with acid dyes, that I wasn't going to try to dye cotton or linen or any of the plant fibers. I'd buy those already dyed, and I started working in acid dyes. The water where I live is not great for getting a color-fast dye out of natural dyes. Michelle Wicklinger is able to do it. Her whole company up in Seattle, they've got great water. And their water will yield, if you do it right, will yield light-fast dyes out of natural fiber, or natural plant material. I never had that kind of luck. Everything I did faded, so I decided, no, I'm not going to use natural dyes for my actual, garments, or scarves or shawls or whatever. The pillows didn't really matter, so I was going to use my natural dyes on the pillows. But the acid dyes, I was able to start dyeing wool and mohair for ruanas and shawls, and that was good. Okay, here's a ruana with one of my silk scarves, and I'm going to pass around a couple of silk scarves. These I've hand painted the yarn before it went on the loom.
Much weird.
Yeah, don't ask how long it took. I can't give you a good answer. There's a couple of those. This is raw silk, and raw silk also takes the acid dyes, so
Wow.
a different feel, different color to start with. So pass those around. Okay. So I no longer weave shawls and ruanas because in the 90s my shoulders started giving out, and I felt like I had Julie will appreciate this. I felt like I had an orthopedic surgeon on retainer. I had 4 shoulder surgeries and a bunch of other issues. I mean, I have, I still use them and stuff, but weaving wide things for a long period of time, they just start getting weak and giving out. So I mostly do scarves now. Yeah, good muscles, but the tendons and the rotator cuff and all of that. So.
How can they feel so different in the both silk?
Oh, okay. The really smooth ones, that's Bombex silk. Bombex from Bombex morai moth. Basically, if you've ever had a second grader who's raised silk moths and all of that. That's Bombex morai usually that is used. That's the silk from China. And to get that, you have to kill the silkworm before it comes out of the cocoon. Because the cocoon is unspun in one long piece of fiber.